Okay.
You like that? The nice, bright, chartreuse Greg Norman shirt?
It's going to be a lot to look at for an hour. Do you have anything else? Can you take, is this a laptop or a docked?
Wait a second. Let me get a rainbow colored scarf for you.
No, what I'm why don't you just, can you take the laptop into your closet and let us pick something?
That's one thing dealing with Joe. You never know what's going to happen.
As long as you're prepared for the worst, you won't be disappointed.
All right.
Hey, Rob, I need to talk to you. I mean, you may have a client for you, by the way.
Okay.
I'm sure.
Normally, I would be really excited about that, but I've had 3 people today like, can I have a call with you today? And I'm like, oh, geez, I got to prepare for the FDA meeting this afternoon. I don't know how I can fit another call in.
Yeah, we'll do it next week.
But next week would be much better. But today, the list is full, and I know what's going to happen. My parents are coming up to the house this weekend, and they don't tell me when they're coming. They just show up. So the bet right now is that they'll show up at noon, but now that I realize I'm on this call, I suspect it'll be any second now. And the dog will come in and jump up on my lap.
Absolutely and unequivocally want your parents to be part of this call. I implore you. In fact, call them now and see where they are.
Well, they purposely keep their cell phones locked in Pelican cases just in case a monsoon hits. Yeah. And they keep it turned off so you can't call them, and they'll turn it on, they'll call you, they'll leave a message, and then they'll close it back up and put it in the Pelican case. So they spent way too much time living on a boat.
I think, Rob, your color of your shirt really goes with mine too.
It does. It makes Joe look dull. He's never been
Joe
dull.
looks pretty gray.
You know, I can easily make you an attendee, Robert. Mr. Tugwell, until later.
So we'll just have Joe talk today because he's wearing the pretty purple shirt.
Everyone is entertained. But they've come here for an education. They heard that Rob Packard was talking.
I will be happy to educate people on remote auditing or anything else that I might know something about.
You know, most people, when they hear on a live call, hey, I have a new client for you, they express some kind of emotion resembling joy or excitement or potential wealth building opportunities. And you're like, oh, no.
Well, I think Michelle might be in the same boat right now. Both of us are,
you know what?
This high in workload.
Michelle's success is costing me a fortune, which is to say she doesn't need me doing any marketing for her anymore. She can't handle any clients. She has 2 full-time employees now. I know you've taken that path, and I congratulate. What are you up to, 10?
I'm up to 8 full-time. So I've hired 3 full-time in less than 3 months. Not that I recommend this to anybody, but this is what I've done.
I kind of hired my wife, and it's working out okay.
Good.
She's still on payroll. Robert, educate us. Tell us about remote auditing.
Okay. So Matthew and I decided to start, Matthew Walker, one of my employees, and I decided to just start writing a book on remote auditing back at the beginning of this pandemic. And we had always been doing some training on auditing, and we had actually a webinar on remote auditing. We had written books on, or articles on remote auditing, but we were thinking about writing a book on the topic.
Was remote auditing a thing before people could not go together?
Yeah, it was actually, I was able to find a book, I think it's dated in 2013, on remote auditing. They called it Audits. And there's other people that have called it virtual audits.
And before we were in a situation where we weren't supposed to be in the same room together.
Mhm.
Why was that chosen? Was it just cost saving, or was it that you are in such a remote area that it's impractical to travel to you? I mean, who would...
Those were the two biggest reasons. You would have companies in Australia, New Zealand, that needed CE marking, and they would try to do as much as they could remotely. So almost always the stage 1 audits were done remotely.
Mhm.
And then they would come on site for the stage 2 audits because they had to be on site at least for one of the audits.
Okay.
And the stage 2 audits are usually a whole week, whereas the stage 1 audits are typically a day.
So before you educate us, let me ask the stupid questions that people who have no idea might ask. And that is, I'm thinking that an audit is physically looking at stuff. And if my view is
Mhm.
dictated by you with the, you're showing me this room,
Mhm.
but I can't see what's in that door over there. And I suspect that's where you keep the vermin and poisons. And I might say, could you walk over to that room? Yes, but whatever's to the left of your bed there,
Yep.
I don't even know that that exists, so I didn't even know to ask you to go there. I mean, I don't know how I would say, please walk the perimeter of your building and show me every crevice.
So that's one of the biggest concerns of notified bodies is that companies will share video, but they'll direct the video away from the things that could be problems. And there's a couple of things that you can do to address that, but ultimately,
That's the notified body?
Yes, the notified body can do things, or any auditor can do things to address that issue.
Because I
But
imagine most people who might listen to this would be on the receiving end, and they want these tricks about how to get away with stuff.
well, all I have is ways to identify where problems might be as a remote auditor, because that's one of the things you're looking for. Have I covered all the areas that are important?
Mhm.
And if you just let the other person lead you in an audit, whether you're physically there or you're doing this remotely, you're not supposed to let the person lead you. You're supposed to have a plan based on what you know about the facility and the products they make and the quality system they have and what kind of problems they've had. You're supposed to lead it as the auditor to the areas that are important and have the biggest risks, not let the auditee take you down the primrose path to everything's fine and nothing to look here. These are not the droids you've been looking for. And that is definitely the number one concern of the notified bodies, and particularly so since the entire reason why we have this MDR being implemented in Europe is because there was a scandal where a company was using fraudulent material that was industrial grade silicone instead of using implant grade silicone. And so there was a professional auditor that is trained to look for this stuff and missed it. Why? Because they announced the audits in advance and the person didn't know what to look for to see if there was fraud. And the company, because they knew when he was coming, probably was not making, they were probably making sure there's none of that material in the building whenever they had scheduled audits. So one of the changes they made is now they have unannounced audits.
I just invited Jose to.
Hi, Jose.
Because you just, yes, unmute. Yeah, you're muted. You have been unavailable this week because you just had a what?
Yeah, we just went through a remote ISO 1345 audit.
And it was unannounced, yes?
Now this one was planned. So this is for certification. And so this one was planned in advance. And we did both our phase 1 and phase 2 audits remotely because of, well, actually, I think the phase 1, if I remember correctly, can't remember if it was pre-COVID lockdown. It just made sense. You know, as Rob was saying, phase 1, usually it's fine to do it remotely. And phase 2 was meant to be in person, but because of travel restrictions, we ended up doing it remotely.
Okay. And what kind of products does your company make?
So we're a product development firm. So we specialize in connected wireless medical devices. So it's primarily, you know, it's a lot of things that go into the home, sometimes stuff that goes to the clinic and connects to the cloud. But we don't do manufacturing. We only do product development.
So that's one of the things that makes it possible is because you don't do physical manufacturing at your facility. Software companies have the same luxury. If you're truly have only software as a medical device and you don't have physical products that are manufactured at your facility, then it is possible to do 100% remote audit because there isn't any vermin in the back room to go look at. But did you have anything else to add?
Well, the thing that I was going to say is, like, you're right. I would say the one, little caveat is we do hardware. And so part of the audit was sort of a Zoom-based tour of the facility and going into the lab and looking at equipment and looking at calibration certificates and calibration dates. Because, for verification, for example, of hardware, as you're going through the development process, you do want to ensure that you've got a proper lab for it and that your equipment's calibrated and all of that, your environmental controls are appropriate. So, we did have some of that, but certainly it's going to be a smaller part of the audit than if we were a contract manufacturer per se.
Okay. And did they ask for a map of your facility ahead of time?
They did. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the key tricks that an auditor has that they should be utilizing. They should always be asking for a map of the facility whenever they're planning a remote audit. It's not a bad idea when you have a regular audit, but a remote audit, it's absolutely necessary.
Is that something that most people have? I mean, if I'm renting space, I don't know that I would even know where to get a map of where the rooms are and the things are.
Well, one of the most common nonconformities I see in a company that's going through initial certification of a manufacturing facility is they don't have adequate pest control documentation. You're required as a medical device manufacturer to have a pest control program, and along with that goes with a map of the facility identifying all the monitoring sites where you put traps and wherever you're allowed to put pesticides versus areas where you're not allowed to put pesticides. Most companies also have a safety evacuation plan where they say, these are the routes to evacuation of the facility. So those are two different documents for two completely different purposes that aren't specifically for auditors, but they can be utilized to sort of get a map of what the facility looks like. So where are the evacuation routes and where do you put traps and where can pests get into this facility can tell you a lot about, hey, maybe these are the places I should go look on my virtual tour of the facility. And if you see it's only a 5,000 square foot facility and the bulk of the activity is going to be done in one lab, as Jose was describing, then I can focus my audit on just a virtual tour of this lab and I can probably do everything we want virtually. But if you have a very large facility with loading docks and multiple manufacturing lines and a warehouse, it starts becoming a little bit more challenging to do a thorough job of auditing the facility. And if you're going to do a remote audit of a facility like that, you really need to be following along with the map and sort of use a highlighter on the map and say, this is where I went, and indicate we spent some time here and write some notes, and move your highlighter over and write a little note. I spent some time here. So you actually have a physical map in front of you as the auditor, marking down where you were when you wrote different sections of notes and when you observed different things. And I found it's even helpful to have those maps with me when I go to physically to a facility, because you get turned around and you're like, now what is the process flow? How do I make sure things don't get mixed up? Where is the warehouse? Where is the receiving inspection? Just having a map of the facility can help you when you're physically there, but it's absolutely essential when you're doing things remotely.
Let me ask, I just happened to note that Jose had an audit this week, which was coincidental. If there's anyone else on the call that's had an audit in the last, say, 6 months since COVID hit, raise your hand, let me know, and we'll give you some time. Thanks, Jose.
Yeah. And we've actually had 2 clients that were audited by notified body auditors. Both of them insisted upon showing up on site because they were MD SAP audits where it's legally required that they go on site for at least the second audit. And both companies had established the proper barriers to exposing people to COVID. And so they had these plexiglass barriers at conference room tables. Everybody was wearing masks. They actually split people up into rooms because they couldn't have everybody that they would normally have participate in one room. So they actually had 2 conference rooms going simultaneously in the same building. And they had people working remotely as well. So it's very different now doing a stage 2 certification audit for ISO 13485, but companies aren't stopping doing business. They are proceeding. Excuse me.
Andre, you had one last month?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we had to reschedule it because originally it was scheduled for April, and in New Jersey, we just could not have any visitors at the time. They wanted to do an in-person one for 13485, but unfortunately, because of our rule with being an essential manufacturer and the fact that we had to prevent anybody from coming in, we held them off. So we just had it last month, and we did have it remotely. It was set up remotely, and Rob is 100% correct. We have a 16,000 square foot facility. Storage, loading docks, production areas, and so forth. And we provided what areas are involved under the scope of the 13485. Certain areas are not. We have another operation that's unrelated to 13485. So we provided those areas, and we did, in essence, a virtual walk around based upon what they were asking. So they would ask us, for example, where's your quarantine area? We'd show them quarantine and so forth. So it was unique for us because that was our first remote audit, and things that Robert talking about are certainly part of it. It was thorough, and I would say comparable to an in-person because we did share documents back and forth during the audit, and it worked out very well with being able to put, load things up and then make requests and load things as we went along. So it worked out okay.
Mm-hmm. And who is your notified body?
BSI.
Okay. So we had one by BSI. We had another one by SGS. We've had one by Intertech recently as well. I have a friend of mine at SGS. His name's Greg Jones. He used to be at BSI. He's head of their medical device auditing team for all of the U.S. And Greg made an important distinction between the difference of a desktop audit, and it really shouldn't even have the name audit in it, but we've always called it a desktop audit, and an actual virtual audit or remote audit. When you're doing a desktop audit, what that means is people are emailing you or uploading files for you to review, and you sit at your desk and review them, and then you identify what's wrong with those documents, or say what documents are missing. So you're really only looking at the things that are documents and records that they've provided to you. Whereas an actual audit must involve sampling of records, seeing the facility, and speaking with the people that are process owners and people actually doing the work. So it's not just papers, it's not just documents, it's also speaking with the people to assess, does this person actually know what they're doing? Can they answer my questions intelligently? Do they seem to understand how to do this process? Because just because the piece of paper says the right things doesn't mean the person is doing the right things. So the difference between a desktop audit and a remote audit is the desktop audit, you read the paperwork and say, yep, the paperwork says what it should. Whereas when you do a remote audit, you're making sure that the person is actually doing the things that the paper says. And that's quite a different distinction there. And that explains why you can't just upload everything to the cloud and let the auditor have their time. And you shouldn't be expecting these notified body audits that are remote to be 10 minutes discussion at the end of this is what I found. That's not really what you should be expecting at all. That being said, I have seen that with notified body auditors. I'm not going to say which notified body, but it's one I respect very much. It's just that particular auditor was taking advantage of the situation and doing as much as they possibly could from their desk without talking to anybody, looking at records, writing up their report, and then they basically only had a closing meeting with us. And the client, of course, wasn't complaining because we had prepared all the documentation for them and everything looked great. But so they got no findings, but they never took a look at the facility. They really didn't ask any questions, and it was a certification audit. So that's definitely very unusual to see that. And that has gotten a lot of notified bodies in trouble. So you shouldn't expect that, but it does still happen. Anybody else that has done audits recently, Joe?
I have Joanne coming on to ask a question.
Okay.
And Jonathan will join us in a moment too. I'm just adding them. Joanne, I cannot hear you. And I hope I'll be able to. And let me get Jonathan. There we go.
While we're waiting, can I ask Rob a question?
Of course.
Hey, Rob, I mean, when we went through this, as I said, it was the first time we did a remote, but it was very interactive or iterative where, you know, we had the 3 people involved in our quality system, including me, and, you know, they would ask, the inspector would ask questions and ask for a document and then ask for, let's say, an SOP that supported that document. So we didn't know where it was going. It was just kind of random based upon what he was going on. So it certainly wasn't, I wouldn't consider it to be just paperwork. It was an active audit.
Yeah, that's how it should be. You should let the evidence that you gather and the way people respond to questions guide where you go next, and they call it following the audit trail. So that sounds like you had a very good auditor and probably somebody that has quite a bit of experience. Just to become a notified body auditor, you have to do about 50 audits to become the lead auditor, and most of those are observed by other people. And they're evaluating you all along the way. Plus, you've taken a formal course on it. And before you even apply for the job, you had to have 5 years of experience. So 5 years of experience, take a formal auditing course, and then have other people observe and critique you for 50 audits. And then you can be on your own. So these people are not novices by any means, but sometimes you'll see a little bit of laziness, particularly when they get overworked, but it sounds like you had a good audit.
Joanne,
hi, John.
Sorry. Joanne?
Yeah, hi, Rob. I'm an auditor also for 1345, and I've done auditing for 9001. I'm just curious, are you requesting logs? So say for like a CAPA system, are you requesting the log so that you can actually pick 10 random samples of what's on the log to ascertain the health of the actual system?
That's one strategy. Generally, I don't pick randomly because I tend to do first party and second party audits rather than third party audits like I used to. When I was working for BSI as a third party auditor, I would do random sampling. But sometimes it wasn't all that random. Sometimes it was very biased sampling geared towards where risk was. And so I would bias all my sampling like I do now towards complaints and adverse events. And I would also bias it towards anything that would involve design changes. And my reason for that is just those are the highest risk areas. Whenever you see a design change, a complaint, or an adverse event, those are areas where something serious could be wrong. And so I focus on those CAPAs, and I do see lots of CAPAs for more administrative things that are lower risk, and I will sample those occasionally, but I spend less time on them by far.
Do you check the health of the system? So like on a CAPA system, do you look at the health of the actual system itself to screen for high-risk items that could lead you to those high-risk items?
Yes. So if I'm doing a first-party audit, or I'm even doing when I did third-party audits, I'd look at the management reviews and I'd try to figure out where the highest risk areas were. I'd look at what different design history files they have and technical files they have, and I would always try to pick the higher risk ones. And if it were a company that had been that I had audited before, I would try to rotate, so I don't always look at the same products. And I would also ask, what were the last two? Let me see the last 2 audit reports if I'm doing a first party audit, because I want to see what the last 2 auditors looked at. I'll give a simple example. I see almost every single notified body auditor sample packaging and sterilization validation. And that's great, but it just shows that they're very comfortable with packaging and sterilization validation because they see it in every single company that has a sterile product. So they know exactly what to look for, and they can just go right through it and say, yep, it has everything I need, or no, it doesn't. And I try to, I've actually said in some of the audits, even when I was a third-party auditor, I'll look at anything but packaging and sterilization validation. And they would laugh at me. They were like, why is that? I'm like, because I'm sure it's been sampled so many times, there's nothing wrong with it anymore. Like, I want to see something else. Give me anything else but that. And, you know, if it's a Band-Aid, that might be the most important thing. But I was like, you have automated machines. Let's see some validation of those machines. Something else. And I would often find things, and I would often find that, you know, this process hasn't been revalidated in a decade, and nobody's looked at it even once. And I'm like, when was the last time you looked at it in an internal audit? Well, we haven't. I'm like, well, you can't just keep on looking at the same things every time and expect to see something different. It's supposed to be a sampling, and so you look for breadth and depth. And
yeah, I'm looking for an evaluation of risk in the actual CAPA or change control systems. So an actual evaluation of the risk of whatever that change was, or whatever, you know, the problem was. So,
and
okay, thank you for the answer.
an example of an audit I did for an orthopedic manufacturer. One of the things that they have in the as an expectation is that you will identify any residual risks in your instruction for use. So I would go to the company and I would go through the risk analysis, and I would identify the highest risks that were still residual risks. And I would say to them, okay, let's pick the 3 highest things, or the 4 highest things, or 5 highest things, depending on how much time I had, and say, let's pick these highest risks and let's see if those are listed in the instruction for use. And it's frightening how many times they're not in there. And like, you've identified this as the highest risk item of all the risks that are associated with this product after you've implemented design controls and verification validation, but you don't have anything mentioning it in your instruction for use. So I'm like, I didn't do 100% sampling of every single residual risk. I just picked the highest risks, and you don't have those mentioned. So I'll write up the nonconformity, and I'll say, you know, you're required to have all the residual risks listed here. So when you do your investigation of root cause, I expect you to not just go back and address the 4 or 5 things I looked at, but I expect you to sample more broadly to make sure you've addressed all the residual risks in your risk analysis. And because you might have 17 technical files, that might take you a while. And they don't like to hear that. And I'm like, this is an internal audit. You can write up what you want to write up, but this is what I would expect if I were an FDA inspector coming in, or I were a notified body auditor coming in. And as a first-party audit, we're supposed to be tougher on you than they are, because we're supposed to find the problems so you don't get those nonconformities from the third-party auditors.
Hey, Robert.
Yes.
I know I'm supposed to be like the mature host and everything, but I want some congratulations for being able to stay silent through all of that, because I wanted to just say, Earth to Jan Gates, Earth to Jan Gates.
She's got that green screen back there. And
I've never had, you know, it always like, what? Why, Jan? Just why?
Because my background is sort of ugly looking. Well, wait
I know, but
I'll show you.
outer space?
Yeah, I like the stars.
Okay. Well, I brought her on because you started talking about packaging and sterilization. I'm sure she has something to add. But first, our friend Jonathan Saul, he's
been waiting patiently.
gone for, no, but even more than that, I haven't seen him in 4 to 6 weeks. I was
hiking.
Sorry, what? You were hiking?
I was hiking in Sequoia National Park.
Oh, that's a beautiful
Wi-Fi
place.
there, or
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
you don't have Wi-Fi there?
No, there's
No.
no connectivity whatsoever.
How
It's a
long were you
great disconnect. 2 weeks.
Wow, okay. Nicely done. You went with your family?
No, just with some friends. It was pretty strenuous. It's not the kind of family vacation, like,
Okay, fair enough.
but it was a lot of fun
Were you
and good to
sailing and
disconnect.
rappelling and things like that, or no?
A little bit of climbing, yeah.
Yeah, don't invite me. You you had something business related to add.
Yes, of course. Always trying to take the business angle. So with these FDA, I mean, it was a good pivot because you were mentioning about being more strict internally before the FDA shows up. How is auditing taking place right now with the FDA? And how much remote are they doing? And are they doing it well? And I would imagine, that there might have been a disadvantage or to American companies versus foreign companies in the past because the proximity, the availability to show up at any time. How has any of this changed in the COVID, times today?
It definitely has changed and dramatically. Number one, when this first happened, all inspectors that had been assigned to do foreign audits were recalled, and they were told they can't leave the country. And it wasn't just because where they were going was dangerous, and it wasn't just because we might get stuck there, but it was, we need all our resources here because we have a pandemic here. So they needed people to triage and do jobs that they don't normally do. So they made it very clear right at the very beginning, there will be no foreign inspections at all. And what they will do is they will ask if they're supposed to follow up on a warning letter or a 483 within so many months. They would request those things remotely, and they would ask the company to send them the documentation. But I haven't heard from any companies that have had those requests, which is unusual to hear nothing but crickets. To not have any companies that have said, oh, we have a problem. Until about 3 weeks ago, I had one client that came to me and they actually did get inspected by an FDA inspector. So they had already received not a great inspection and they had problems. And the FDA inspector came back to their facility to follow up and it was still not good. And so now they have a major remediation project where they've engaged our firm. They were on the borderline of getting a warning letter, and so we're trying to keep them out of warning letter territory. But the company that they visited was a one-person company. They had other people remotely at other locations, but where the corporate headquarters was, there was one person. And now there are two people because they have a lot of work to do to clean things up. But it's all paperwork. It's just administrative, and it's just at that one location. And it wasn't all that far from the FDA office. So
Gotcha.
if you want to be inspected, locate as close as you can so they can just walk over to your facility, which
Right.
is almost where they are.
So in that context, I mean, do you see that going forward that the FDA is going to be more organized and vigilant for foreign companies because they'll be doing more and more remote-based audits?
The FDA really hasn't talked a lot about what they're going to do on remote audits. And this one example was not even remote. They physically showed up on site. So I haven't heard anything at all about the FDA doing remote audits. It's all been notified bodies, internal and supplier audits that have been remote. Can the FDA? Should the FDA? Yes. But the FDA has been trained for a really long time on this is the way you do FDA inspections. And they have a very specific way they want you to do things. To give you examples, you must use the prison-issued notebooks. So they have formal green and black bound notebooks made by the federal prisons that they must handwrite all their notes in. They are not allowed to do any other system unless they've been authorized to do the validated pilot program with tablets. So they're gradually switching over to tablets, but you will still see 80-90% of the auditors writing in these prison issue notebooks. And they look like scientific lab notebooks. That's what they look like.
Right.
And when you have that kind of culture where we just don't change for decades, we do not embrace technology for decades because that's the way we've always done it. And it literally requires a congressional order to make it change. I think we are in a horrible situation from a risk standpoint as a country, where we have the entire FDA is not doing any inspections, foreign inspections, and they're not equipped or trained to do remote inspections. And
Larry, hold on a sec, Larry. So what do you say to Rob's?
Well, no, Rob's dead on. When I went, I left FDA in '82 and went into the industry, and I went back in 2000. And one of the things that just blew me away was the resistance to change. I didn't know it in the '70s. That was my first job. But I can tell you stories about the aversion to technology because we've always done it this way. Why would we do anything else? And that's just a mental state that the government workers are in because there's no competition. You don't have to improve. And so when I took over the import operations, I had 100 and some people working for me, and I was kind of on my own. And I actually found one of the lab people who knew the Microsoft Access database program, and I hired him in as a compliance officer and gave him a job to develop databases. And he did, and they worked really well. And people from Washington came out and said, "Where did you get those? Oh, well, how are you using that?" And I said, "Well, we developed it here." Well, can we get them? Sure, absolutely. They're government property. But for me, that was a routine thing. But for a government worker, Rob is dead on. Don't expect the FDA to be doing anything modern or innovative, or because that's just not the way they work.
And you don't think COVID will force a little bit of that, some change?
No, I don't. I think that they'll start doing inspections again, and they'll do them on an as-needed basis, and they'll do the the mask and the personal distancing and whatever they're going to do. But I don't think they're going to get away from on-site audits, and hopefully. In the not too distant future, the restrictions can be lifted and they'll get back to work. But right now, it's a good thing for the companies in the sense that they're not getting harassed by FDA on a regular basis.
That's true.
And what about in Europe, like European bodies? I mean, in terms of their inspections and things like that.
They're having trouble because they can't get plane flights. Mm-hmm. So they're all like half of your notified body auditors are physically based in Europe. So for them to travel to the US, be under quarantine, then do their audit, and then fly back, be in quarantine again, that's less than ideal and really putting some logistical problems for them into their normal schedule. And they were already spread thin because they didn't have enough auditors to do the workload. So now you've got they had a delay of the implementation of the MDR, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is great." I'm like, "No, it's not," because all the notified bodies that were planning on no longer supporting the MDD now have to support it for another year. So all those resources you thought were suddenly going to be available because they were supporting MDD and now they're not. Now they have to continue to support it for another year, and so now you're splitting your resources. It's sort of like a telephone. You have your analog and your digital. It never works as well as everything. If everything was digital, you have more bandwidth. But if you have to split your bandwidth between analog and digital, it's not going to work as well. And that's exactly where they're at. They have two different regulations that they have to support with existing number of auditors. So not everybody is equally trained. And so you say, "Oh, this person isn't trained in the new one yet. I can't use them, but they're physically located where I need them." So that's a constant problem they're having.
Gotcha. Well, it'd be good to see, a little bit more remote, or at least an evolution in the FDA process, because I would imagine that, you know, they could probably be more efficient in some of their audit practices, as knowing that, you know, it always counts seeing things with your own eyes.
I think that's probably a good segue into one of the advantages I see of remote auditing that I don't think people have really embraced yet. And so when you design an audit schedule, a lot of people, particularly small companies, will design an audit schedule that consists of one full quality system audit per year, because that's the minimum requirements. They want to get it all over right away. They don't want to drag it out, just get it done. But that doesn't give you any opportunity to look at the rest of the quality system for the other 11 and a half months of the year. You're only looking at it that one time. And so it's much better strategy to say, this process here, let's say it's management review. I want to look at management review right after you did a management review. And then, because if I look at it 11 months after your last management review, anything I find isn't really helpful because it was 11 months ago. What are you going to do now? Maybe even the people don't work here anymore. So the timing of an auditing an area is important. So you tend to do it right after the activity occurs so you can give immediate feedback. And the closer it is to that, the more useful it will be. So if you have, let's say, 30 procedures, there are 30 different processes that you could audit. So why would you do them all at one time always? Because that's the way we've always done it. And there are companies, particularly bigger companies, that say, you know, this is just too big an operation. We have to split it up. So they split it up by necessity. But I really think it would be advantageous to use remote auditing to say, you know, I really don't need to be there for 3 days in a row. I don't even need to be there at all. I can work remotely and I can just look at this one process. And I only need to bother that one department. And so now, instead of bothering your whole company and shutting everything down for an audit, you can say, all I need is this one person for this 2-hour slot. Or let's say it's design controls and I need 4 hours. This one person for half a day, that's all I need. And if you give me some documents ahead of time, I'll read them and I'll review them and I'll prepare. I'll make it very concise and very targeted. I'll do my 4 hours and then I'll write my report and I'm done with that area. And we can strategically pick the timing of when we're going to do it. And that's what I would like to see the FDA do as well. And that's what I would like to see the notified bodies do, is taking the approach of a sampling plan. So we're only going to pick the highest risk areas and we're going to pick them strategically for when it makes sense, rather than just always doing a full quality system audit once a year on the anniversary of the last one, which is what we do.
I'd like to move on. Jan, I invited you on because he was talking about packaging and audits that have very much to do with your world. Do you have any stories or points to make about how you were helping a client and that was the part of the audit that proved problematic, and how do you see it?
I do 11607 audits, internal audits for companies all the time, and they are always missing pieces. And I usually do it remote because it's too much interruption for people to try and sit down and find all the documents that I need to ask them for. And I always find holes, yet they pass all these other audits all the time. And I don't quite understand that. I mean, I had one where I was going through all of it and found out they never did stability studies on their stuff, but it had never been picked up by another auditor. And I
one of
just
the
get really
biggest
confused.
weaknesses in a quality system is the packaging. We've already said they leave the packaging for last to design. Why wouldn't they also leave it the last thing to comply with too?
Yeah, because they don't do design reviews. They willy-nilly pick up. I'm working with a client right now. They've got a whole new packaging system they're doing for a product, and they think they've got their specifications done and they're trying to go on to other aspects, but they don't have any design controls saying why they picked what they did, why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm trying to help them write their reports so they actually know why they did what they did. And it's been, I just get really confused with packaging with people. I just don't understand why they think it's so unnecessary to worry about, especially when they start shipping and they can't put the stuff into anything that makes sense to ship.
I find one of the things that contributes to that is the companies that are doing the packaging validation, they'll do an age testing that's accelerated aging, and they won't have enough samples at that stage to also set aside product for real-time aging. And then they'll just sort of forget about it because now all the focus is on launching the product now that they have clearance or they have CE marking. They don't tend to take the time and say, you know, we really have to put aside product for real-time aging. And so I see the real-time aging almost never gets done. I always find gaps.
I see where they've improved the product. So they did accelerated aging, hadn't started in the real time. They improved the product, had to do accelerated aging, and they didn't start the real time because they improved the product. And so they never did do real time because they were going through with that. That's the one thing I liked about the ISO 11607 for terminally sterilized medical devices. It used to say you had to start real time and accelerated aging at the same time. Now they say 3 months, you can have a separation of 3 months, but it has to be done before you go commercial. Real time has to be started. But I find a lot of people just miss that, and auditors coming in to look at things don't even notice.
Yeah, and I point out to companies, how can you compare the results of this product that was accelerated age with the product that has been real-time age when they're completely different lots made at completely different times? They're not the same raw materials. They're not the same people. They're not the same process if you made changes.
Right, and lots of times they'll forget to do zero-time aging on there, so they have something to compare the accelerated or aged stuff to. Yeah, I find it very amazing, and I am finding that there's more and more jobs for packaging engineers now as some companies are getting found out.
Yeah.
But it's how do we fix that? I don't know how to even fix that.
I have a soft spot in my heart for Jan because I think among my go-to experts that you're probably the least appreciated in terms of people not recognizing how important what you do is. And again, I remember just, you know, the very top stuff because most of what you say goes right through me and is more complex than I can retain. But the one thing that you taught me is packaging is the device.
Yeah.
It's part of it. And so for it to be like, oh, yeah, we need to put it in a box is like, you're not hearing me. And I mean, it was, I don't know, maybe my first 10 of 12 years in the industry before we'd met, did I ever remotely think of that? So, you know, I have to imagine I'm not alone.
Yeah, and lots of times when people think of packaging, they just think of how pretty it looks and
graphics and
yeah, and they don't think about the sizing to actually warehouse it or ship it and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I did find something interesting once when I was working with a pharmaceutical company when I started doing trace backs, because sometimes I like to follow their lines of how they've done certain things. And I traced information back to their raw data, which said they had 2 lots of material that they had done tests on out of Brazil. And there was only 1 lot of raw data information. And they were using that original information to justify everything else they did in the company. How long before they get caught?
Thank you,
They're
Jen.
a big company.
Yeah, I think it's going to all come to a head someday when we have a major recall, a class 1 recall because of packaging problems. That's historically every time we have an increase in regulation and in enforcement is when we have a big class 1 recall. And I don't expect this to be different. Until that happens for packaging being the root cause, I think it'll go business as usual. Not that I'm wishing for a class 1 recall, but because that means somebody could actually get hurt out there, and that's why we're recalling it as class 1. But I think that's what it's going to take.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah. Well, one more pharmaceutical thing that I had, they rarely do shelf life testing on any kind of packaging because they say they do everything on the product and it's sitting there for real-time aging or accelerated aging, whatever they're doing, and then they never look at the package. But they've had major recalls where the child-resistant closure system broke and they had to recall their products, which could have been easily fixed by a 3-month stability study.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just crazy to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. I've sent her back out into space. Rob, when is your book be published?
It was supposed to be published at the end of the month in August, but we have had so much work we had to put it on hold.
Is it at the editor stage, or you're still adding?
Yeah, we're making final edits. So.
Okay. So how many chapters is it?
I think there are 8 chapters, but there's some stuff at the end that I wanted to add, and I don't know if we'll get to add it.
Okay. So before any more questions and contributions come in, could you tell us the names of the chapters, or if you have a slide of it and you have your, and the reason I'm asking something so broad is remote auditing. Okay, thump. That's a topic to me, but there are 8 different things that you wanted to talk about in there, and I don't even know what they are. So could you identify those major food groups?
Yeah, what we actually did is we thought about a couple different ways of organizing it. We ended up organizing it in accordance with the ISO standard for auditing. So there's a lot of people aren't aware that there's actually a standard that tells you how to do auditing, and it's ISO 19011. So 19011, and it's the latest version, I believe, is 2018. So there was an original version that I was trained on, and then there was a 2011 version, and then there was a 2018 version that recently came out. And the latest version, the 2018 version, one of the things they added to it was a risk-based approach to auditing. Believe it or not, that wasn't in there before. So they've got a process approach that is one of the fundamental approaches to auditing, and another item is the risk management. But we took each of the sections of that standard, and we follow along with that standard. And what we do is in each section, we explain how you should adjust your auditing style and methods and techniques from what it says in that standard to accommodate remote auditing. Whereas the standard only has a small little section in one of the appendices explaining remote auditing. It doesn't really cover remote auditing in depth in each section. So we actually went the step of each section of the standard. This is how I would cover it.
Is this a how-to book? And who is the audience? Who should read this book?
People that are lead auditors or people that are audit team members. So anybody that's formally conducting audits or managing an audit program. That's who it's for. And it's a how-to.
How big is that, do you think? I have no idea.
There's probably at least 1 or 2 people at every company that should be qualified to do audits. At least 1, even if it's a small company. You can't outsource the managing of the program. So at least 1 person in the company has to manage it. So 1 person should be reading it. In larger companies, you could have as many as a dozen.
Vermin closet.
Excuse me?
Tiffany just went in the vermin closet.
Yeah, she just got back. She was dropping something off at FedEx.
Your parents still not here?
They're still not here. I know you're disappointed.
I really want to meet them. So theoretically, your book has an audience of tens of thousands of people.
I think realistically, it's probably just under 10,000 globally. But I don't know.
$1,000 a book, that's big money for you.
I don't know how many people are actually going to read it.
Yeah.
You have enough trouble getting people to read standards. But the idea was to make it
of all
as
of
a
those
tool.
people who should have, I say, ouch, that was a burn.
The companies that are doing audits right now, that are doing remote audits, a lot of them are just uploading files to the cloud and saying, read this, and writing a report. And so they're the people that are doing what we call desktop audits, and they're not doing a real audit where they're interviewing people. And that's not everybody, but there are definitely a lot of people that are doing that.
You talked about first, second, and third party audits.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really understand.
That's one of the first things they cover in the standard. A first party audit is an audit done for your company. It's an internal audit.
An internal employee proactively checking for stuff.
Correct. Or it could be a consultant you brought in to audit your own company, but it's auditing yourself.
Got it. And second?
Second party audits are you're auditing your supply chain.
Okay.
And third party audits it's an external independent organization such as the FDA or a certification body coming in to audit you on typically an annual basis, and those are spot checks, and they usually have a legal reason why they must occur.
Namely, we're legally bound to have an audit each year?
Yes, all medical device companies, no matter where they are in the world, are required to have an audit at least every year.
Which is, it's not a legal requirement of them, right? It's a legal requirement of the oversight body to do it.
Yes, so
because I don't need to call anyone up and be like, hey, you know what? It's been 52 weeks now and nobody's called me for an audit. Somebody better get in here or I'm going to be in.
So it depends a little bit on your country, but all the countries in the world require medical device companies to have internal audits every year. In addition to that, you're required to do supplier audits when you don't have enough. When the supplier is a high risk supplier, or as an extra control to make sure that they're doing a good job. And then the third type of audit, the third party audits, if you're using an ISO 1345 system, you have to have them come in and survey the system at least once a year. In addition to that, the Europeans are now doing unannounced audits on top of that. And then the FDA comes in, their target is to come in every other year, but they typically are a little slower than that, so that many times they're 3 years in between inspections. And with COVID, it's going to be even longer.
Okay. I've invited her back down to
Hi, Jan.
You're muted.
Hi, I just wondered if you have worked with companies under a consent decree and what their audits are like, because I got to do it once with a company and that was quite interesting. But if you want to explain that and say what to do, that'd be wonderful.
Well, it depends on the individual's consent decree, of course. Physio Controls was the only company that I worked with under a consent decree. Physio Controls, it was like, it was in the billions. It wasn't in the millions. It wasn't even the tens or hundreds. It went over $1 billion in cost for that situation. But basically, they were making a life-supporting and life-sustaining monitoring system for, there was a multi-parameter monitor. So like in an ambulance, they would have these multi-parameter monitors to check all the vital signs of the patient that's being rushed to the hospital, and they're trying to keep that person alive. And so they had a problem with those devices, and the FDA wasn't satisfied with how they were addressing their 483s. It escalated to warning letters. They didn't respond to the warning letters adequately, and it eventually became something that the FDA took the approach of, we're going to have a consent decree. And what that means is, instead of going to court, you agree that this is your plan that you're going to comply with. And if you don't comply with it, then we're taking you to court, and potentially you will have people go to jail. So in order to avoid court or jail, the companies agreed to the plan that the FDA gave them. And that often means choose from this list of consultants who's going to bail you out and who's going to teach you how to do this properly. And in Physio Control's situation, they had so many consultants on site, it dramatically increased their staff there. They didn't have like one or two. They had, from what I heard, dozens at any one time in the building helping them fix their quality system problems. And so I have not seen auditors doing that under a consent decree, but that would be one scenario that could have happened under a consent decree. If the company wasn't doing any internal audits, the FDA could say, in order to avoid court, you are going to have to comply with having this consent decree. And it says you will hire an ex-FDA person to come in here and do a proper internal audit. And I've actually seen that done as where the company suggested it. I've never seen it where the FDA said, you shall do this, but that is what they would do under a consent decree. Instead, I've seen companies trying to avoid consent decrees by proactively going out and finding an ex-FDA person to help them clean things up. And I actually had a company in Canada that had been put under import detention where you're not allowed to ship into the US anymore. And the solution to get them out of it was, after we fixed all the problems for them, rather than doing an internal audit where the person, me, that had helped to fix everything would have to audit my own work. And none of them really knew how to do a quality audit, because otherwise they wouldn't have had the problems they had. Instead, we brought in an ex-FDA person to do the audit, and we actually sent the report to the FDA to show them we're ready for your inspection to close down the warning letters. And so that approach worked very well. But in a consent decree, what you would expect is they would say, you need to find an ex-FDA person to come in here and do an audit of the system. And so they're going to do it just the way the FDA would. They're going to simulate exactly what an FDA inspector would do. And so therefore, it's probably not going to be remote. And they're probably not going to use any remote techniques, which is definitely a problem right now.
And the average time to close a consent decree that you've set up with the FDA or the courts?
When I dealt with that company that was under import detention, they were under the misguided assumption that they could get everything done in 6 months, because that's what their CAPA plan said. The CAPA plan barely got done in 6 months. But the FDA said, okay, now that you've given us your documentation, we'll review it and we'll get back to you if it's okay. But you still can't ship into the US until we do an inspection. And we're not going to schedule an inspection until we're satisfied that all your CAPAs have been addressed. So they wouldn't even schedule an inspection to follow up and close it down until after they were satisfied the paperwork they had gotten was okay. So that's what you would expect for in a consent decree as well, until the people that were assigned as consultants had done all the work and all the CAPAs and all the paperwork looked good. Then and only then would the FDA come back in and close things down and say, okay, we'll remove this restriction. And because the FDA doesn't go out every year to every company, they normally are on a 2-year or a 3-year cycle. From the time that they said everything was okay, we can go in and do an inspection, that's when you got put on the list to be inspected. And it might be 2 years before you actually get inspected. So whatever time it takes you to fix all the problems, add at least a year to that. And so 18 months would be light speed for a company to get off import detention. And if you're under a consent decree, it's even worse because now the FDA has jurisdiction and they can keep on checking on and say, nope, not good enough. Try again. We'll come back in 6 months. We'll come back in a year. And it's not
that's
better,
what
it's
happened.
worse.
That's what happened with the company. The company actually bought my company and they were under consent decree. It took them 17 years to get off of it. So,
yeah.
And that was considered pretty fast, actually.
Yeah. And what will happen is sometimes companies find the only way they can get off is to sell a company. You just divest it. That's the only way they can get out of it. And now it's under a new management team, and the FDA says, "Oh, the new management team's doing a good job, and we didn't find any 483, so things are good." But yeah, trying to get the original company that was put under a consent decree to be taken off of it, your best thing you could probably do is fire all the managers, all of them, everybody in top managers, get rid of them all. And for companies where you have somebody doing something that's negligent or illegal, they'll blacklist you, and you're not even allowed to participate in the management of the company. You can own it, but you can't participate. So that happened to Triad when they had the antiseptic disinfectant packs that they were shipping out that were failing QC testing. They were shipping it anyway because they didn't want to throw it out and make more. And when the FDA found out, they took it was a family-owned business. They took all the owners and said, you can't participate in this business anymore. Hire somebody else to run your business or close. You decide. So they went back they started making product again, but not with any of the owners. All the owners could only own product or own the company. They couldn't actually participate in any management.
So this is very good reason on why you want auditors to keep you away from warning letters and 483s, because it just gets messier and messier.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jan.
I need to get going here. I have another call. I have an FDA meeting this afternoon. It's our last minute to prepare for it.
What about our time with your parents? I thought.
I can have them call and we could do a Zoom meeting if you want tonight, but we'll have to have scotch on our side because
I totally would. That's
okay.
like a drop everything kind of occasion to hang out.
Okay, I'll see if my dad will put up with a call.
All right, text me.
He doesn't like working. He likes being retired.
Okay, fair enough.
But
Rob
he doesn't.
Packard, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
I can hear it.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, he's got the same name I do, but he doesn't really look the same.
Okay.
No ponytail.
And so you'll let us know when the book is ready.
Yes, I will.
And how will it be priced? Do you know?
It's priced at $4.95 or $4.99, something like that. So
$5, great.
Yeah, and after it publishes, then it was going to go up by $5, so it might be $10.
I was joking. I thought you were talking $495.
No, it's a $5 book.
Okay, and it doesn't sound like the fastest way to riches, but
no, the intent wasn't to be rich.
Oh, I know.
The intent was to give people a tool. So when companies say, well, I can't afford this, I'm like, you can buy my book and read it.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
Andre says at $5, even he'll buy it.
I figured that might be the attitude of some people, but I also know that sometimes when things are really cheap, they just end up on the shelf and they never actually get read.
By the way, I did wear your professional napper shirt on holiday this last weekend, so I appreciate that.
I'm glad you were able to put that to good use.
I do.
Did you have bunny slippers on too?
Goodbye, Rob.
Okay, bye-bye.
Everyone, thank you.